Okay, so Sean, you've written this article in the recent Angelus Press, and the article is called The Artifact and the Soul, a Catholic View of Artificial Intelligence. So, Sean, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background in UX so that we can get a little bit of context for where you're coming from on this article?
Sure, thanks, Ed. So my name is Sean Romer. For purposes of this discussion, I'm a Catholic essayist. So my work explores matters of faith, culture, history, technology, and ordinary life, and where all those things come together. So I draw on my experience in as a web designer, specifically the field of user experience architecture, information design, technical communication. I approach large questions through the lens of lived experience. So, I could start with something like a conversation with a friend, an encounter with a stranger, a pilgrimage I go on abroad, or maybe something like a monastery bell, ringing before dawn in a religious community. So my writing's rooted in it's in the old Catholic foundation that truth exists independently of human preference. The task of our reason is not to invent reality, but to discover it. So that's my approach to the topics I treat. I reflect on, contemplative religious life, language, family, tradition, modern culture, and artificial intelligence, the article you referenced. So, I like to get into what lies beneath the appearance and get down to what's really permanent, what permanent realities that are enduring amidst all the sort of fashions of the age, trying to peel that back and get into what the essence is. I'm a student of language, history, Catholic thought. My style is I combine a lot of observation. I've hold in a lot of humor, narrative, philosophical reflections. My essays, they begin with something concrete, people and places, and they lead towards broader questions of truth, beauty, goodness, the meaning of life, that sort of stuff. I've been published in Angelus. I used to be published in Catholic Family News. That's been discontinued, but various publications of the Society of St. Pius X, some of their news websites. I live in Kansas City. I still work as a web designer in the field of user experience. And yeah, so there's a setup in terms of my background. User experience, in brief, is it's a field of in my case, it's the field of web design. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at how to design anything digital. It could be a website, could be a mobile app, could be a kiosk at an airport, right? But how to make the tools, design them in a way that they're optimized for human usage. People like me really dislike when we ask people to behave like machines because you have to use a machine. It's like, no, make the machine work for the people. So user experience is how to optimize it for human usage, trying to keep people human. The way to think a lot. I work with a lot of tech guys, obviously. Some of my friends, some of my colleagues, I think they're really fascinated by the technology, and that gets almost all their attention. I think the technology is fascinating too, but for me, even more fascinating to the people who create and use the technology. So that's the emphasis I give to it. And then, of course, as a traditional Catholic, I try to blend everything with Catholic thought. I like to leverage Thomistic thought as much as I can. I'm not like a formally trained Thomist who was at Flannery O'Connor called herself a hillbilly Thomist. So you might call me kind of an aspiring. I don't have any formalized training, but I'm not a rookie either. I do know something, and I try and true it up with Catholic thought. So there's a foundational introduction. How's that?
Yeah, okay, so you're blending your knowledge of Catholic philosophy and theology with your technical knowledge of user experience, which is in how to use technology.
That's
And I,
exactly right. It's a
and I
lot of
think that's
yeah.
really interesting because my whole thing is, how can we be human? And how can we learn how to use technology in a way that we can continue to be human, that we can use these things in a human way. So can you give us a little bit of the thesis of this article and how how you can start to connect some of those ideas?
That is what I try to do, and it felt pretty ambitious when I was doing it. I think there could be a whole series wrapped around this, but in simple terms, what I was attempting to do was to take Catholic, particularly Thomistic thought, my experience as a web designer and dealing with technology and how human beings interact with the technology, but with information, with concepts, with ideas, and then looking at what artificial intelligence was. And my take on artificial intelligence is it's a tool. It is, and people have used tools for time out of mind. I mean, a shovel or a hoe, working the land to till the soil is a tool. A car is a tool. A calculator is a tool. And so, as such, it's a neutral object. It can have good applications, bad applications. What are we to make of artificial intelligence? How can we make sure that as a tool, it's used in a good and healthy and proper way? What can I contribute with someone with my experience in the field of everything digital, the user experience side of things? What can I contribute to that conversation to keep it Catholic and to make sure people are thinking and talking about things in the same way? So AI is a very powerful tool. I do see a lot of risks around it, so we have to make sure we're very careful how we use it. The more powerful the tool is a rule, the more careful we have to be to make sure that we have a very strong moral foundation in how we use it. A parallel I use is America. Plenty of Americans are firearm owners, right, or gun owners. And my family, when I was growing up, we weren't gun owners. My parents weren't opposed to it. It just wasn't, part of who we are. But they always taught us like, if you want to become a gun owner, that's fine. Just make sure you know what you're doing, you handle it properly. So as an adult, I acquired my own firearms. And one of the things I picked up very early is you talk to people who Second Amendment stuff and American gun culture is gun safety is such a huge part of that community and that culture. And whoever you talk to, they're always talking about proper handling, proper storage. Don't point it at that person, even if it's not loaded. And so, gun safety is just crucial to gun ownership culture. And I think a parallel can be drawn there with that and artificial intelligence. It's a powerful tool. It doesn't cause there's not a physical damage, but there are very real and very profound risks in terms, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. So we want to make sure when we use it in a very prudent, careful, sort of safety conscious way, not to this extent that we're paranoid of it. It is a tool that we can master. But we do want to be careful not to be reckless, not to be irresponsible, not to cause needless harm. And that involves being aware of its capabilities and then aware to how to use it appropriately.
Yeah, and I like the analogy with gun safety laws because, yeah, I come from a military family and we've always been taught gun safety laws. It's like this thing is dangerous, so there are rules for how you use it. And even if people aren't familiar with guns, how about driving cars?
It's an
Cars can
yeah.
be dangerous. So there are rules for how we drive cars, car safety. Everybody's always saying safety first, but it seems like um, when technology hit the market, starting with iPhones and the internet and now AI, it seems like there are no rules. And like I don't know how that happened.
You're not wrong, although that is a very broad generalization. I would say there were not rules put in place at the same time to help govern proper usage of it, and that's a much slower process that I think will develop over time. And we're in that period where the legal side of things hasn't caught up to the capabilities of the tool itself, and so people are doing a lot of exploration and experimentation with it. And that's why I'm trying to be very vocal and clear about remembering the human dimension, remembering the moral aspect of it. Because I work with people in tech who are infatuated with what the tech can do, and it is fascinating. But I'm the guy over there going, you do understand that we don't want to make people who are addicted to the technology. Like you understand addiction's a bad thing, right? And they sort of look at me and go, yeah, fine, thanks, Sean. But I mean, I see that as my role when I work with this stuff. And I in the job I do, the nature of the business I'm in is I have to work with technical tools all the time, and I have to use AI tools to be effective in my role now. And that's a fairly recent thing, just in the past few years. And my colleagues and I, we use them proficiently and I think responsibly. We're also very aware of what its limitations and constraints are, and we're constantly just shaking our head at our AI tools. Like it does some amazing things and it does some really strange, unpredictable things too. And people are still figuring out what that means. But from a legal safety perspective, yeah, they're just not there yet. There's conversations about it. People are seeing problems. People are raising the alarm, but no one knows quite what to do about it yet.
Yeah, it almost seems like with the analogy of guns and cars, the people who sell the guns and the people who sell the cars, they want to sell you a product, but their way of making money is not going to be in damaging anybody. But it seems that with the technology, the way the people who sell the technology make the money is if they can get you addicted to it. And so it seems like they're making money off of, people's vices. And so with your experience and all of that, are you seeing that also?
I see it as a side effect, not as a goal. But yes, I am seeing it. And I have kind of like insider knowledge about how that happens. One representative example is, businesses are there to be productive, to be prosperous. They want to be viable over a long period of time, multi-generational, hopefully. They have to provide a service or a product that customers value. So you're my customer, I want to sell you a car. I have to produce a car that satisfies whatever your personal needs or goals are. If I can do that, then we do business, right? It's for you, it's worthwhile to give up some cash to get the car that I produce for you. So in that sense, the model holds for the AI tools and all the digital stuff too. What's happening from the business perspective is it's moving so quickly and it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Like AI is in things now people don't even think about.
Yeah.
We're thinking about sitting at your computer and typing into a prompt and seeing what your chat GPT or your Claude or whatever comes back with. But I mean, in business, you're seeing it in you go to the grocery store, and now AI is being used by these supermarket owners to figure out what products to put on the shelf, what prices to set them at, when to rotate them out, what aisle to put things on. They used to be all be done by hand. Then they started using it more and more. Now AI just does that. And the benefit is you can get products in a local market, say for a supermarket chain, that people actually want based on the market at prices that they want. So those are, I mean, that's a useful benefit of AI. What's happening though is when people are using these tools, if they're overly reliant on the AI tools, they can become de-skilled. That's the term I used in that article that
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
People, if you rely on the tool to do everything, your own skills atrophy. You lose the ability to reason, to work through, to find out the necessary conclusions. And that's the risk of the tool. And the tools are being designed to do that. And don't worry about this. I got the AI tool that'll take care of you. Give me some of your personal information. You won't feel a thing, and I can help you out and get point you in the right direction. And it's convenient. It's very easy to work with. And people don't realize what they give up by doing that, though, if they're not careful, if they're not conscious of it.
Yeah. And I think that is, in my opinion, that's of primary concern because I think a lot of people, there's a lot of, AI alarmism going on out there also, where people are saying, oh, this is a breach of privacy. And, this is going to lead to, our enslavement down the line or whatever. And I'm like, well, hang on just a second, guys. I'm not sure that's even the biggest problem. If you're afraid that, the government is going to use AI to enslave you, I'm not actually so sure that that's the biggest problem because you might not realize that we're already slaves to these things because we're slaves to our impulses.
Yeah, like overt government or whatever, institutional control, because you could have corporations that have the power of a small country, right? A
Yeah,
small, we
yeah,
see that. Some of that I think it's a real thing to talk about, but I think it's more remote. But in the immediate sense, this de-skilling, I'm already seeing it uh, frequently. People they're relying a lot on the tool, and my concern is that they're going to do it too much. That back to the example of like business producing addictive digital tools. One way you in there, it's not the goal. They're not trying to do that consciously. And there are actors who do that. They want you addicted, and they know they're doing that. But some people, it's just from a business perspective, it's like, all right, I want to make a website, and I want you, my customer, to come to my website. I want you to click around, sign up for something, register, buy something, whatever it is. And one of their measures for success is how much time do you spend on my website? Um, and so the more time you spend, the more advertising I can put in front of you. I get money from the advertiser because they're merchandising their product on my website, so that's a win. So and that's actually a measurement the business uses is how can I get someone like yourself to spend more time on my website. That's how they're motivated.
Mhm.
How do you get people to spend time on your website? Well, if you're too efficient, they go away. They don't stay on your website. So you have to like put a bunch of things in there and layer more into it and make it an experience people want to spend more time with. So it makes sense from a strictly business perspective. But then you got, a guy like me coming in as a user experience guy going, people don't need to be spending that much time. Let's figure out what the right balance is where you get what you need as a business, they get what they need as your customer, or it could be an employee, right? Sometimes these is like internal company intranet portals for employees, like whatever it is, you know, what's the right balance there so that it's working for everybody who's part of that conversation.
Yeah, and I can see how the user experience field is right where the rubber meets the road on this issue because if you are in user experience and you're designing the website and the buttons that people click on and the pop-up screens that pop up and the things to grab people's attention, you are kind of like designing the things that might be helping people to be good or de-skilling them, right? And obviously a website can be built in a good way. I can go onto a website and say this is a great website, this is a good website. But what do I mean by good, right? I mean if it's fulfilling its purpose, right? If it's helping me to somehow be benefited and become a better human being. But if that website is doing such a good job of making me a distracted, disintegrated, dismantled idiot, then can we really say it's good anymore? So, um, it sounds like the way you do user experience might be a little bit unique, and that most people, I don't know about this, maybe you can talk about this, but would you say that most people who are in user experience are actually the ones who understand the psychology of distraction and they're the ones who are designing the things to pop up in such a way that now people are just becoming completely, impulsive, completely distracted. And is there a better way that we can design things so that they're engineered well, so
Mhm.
that people can use them seamlessly? Obviously there are some websites where you're like, I can't even find the button to click on. This is obviously designed badly. But sometimes I'm like, I'm just trying to click on this button and something else is getting in the way, preventing me from doing it.
Yep. Yeah, and there are a lot of people who do what I do. It is a specialized field. There's when I was in college a few years ago, there wasn't a degree program for what I do today. So, and even now, there's only a few universities you can actually get a 4-year degree doing what I do. It's a discipline that draws upon a lot of different fields, and there's a lot of pathways into it. So, to answer your earlier question, there are a lot of people who do what I do. Their reasons for getting into the field vary. So my background is I was my undergrad, I was an English major, and I started my career as a technical writer. I was writing user manuals for computers, and then I that segued into coming up with a lot of instructional content like performance support and online help systems and computer-based training and using technology to train people. And then that segued into actually writing content for websites. And then that segued into actually designing the websites, which is what I've been doing for over 25 years now. So, but that was my path. Some people come at it as just strictly visual designers. They're more artists who work in it with digital tools. And so for them, it's about the aesthetic and that they still are mindful that they're designing for people, but their approach is not around language. That was more my background. Theirs is more visual and aesthetic. Some people come from a field like anthropology. A strong root in the early years of my field was library sciences. You think about how to organize all the books in a library. You think about the old Dewey Decimal System, where that translates into website design today. Like I'll have a client when I'm consulting, they might be like a big box store. They have 500,000 unique products, right? How do you represent 500,000 unique products on a screen yay big, right? You have to think about how to design and organize it. And so a lot of the insights that librarians got from library science is about how to organize information, how to classify, how to label, how to make things readily discoverable. And in web designs too, people come looking for stuff. A lot of times they don't even know what the thing is they're looking for. All they know is what problem they're trying to solve. A parallel would be like a librarian in a library. So someone might come to them saying, I'm looking for a book. I don't remember the title or the author's name, but it's hardback in blue, right? And the
Mhm.
librarian, I promise you, if you talk to any librarians, they've had a request like that, and they're very proud of the fact that they helped that guy find his hardback blue book.
Uh-huh.
But if people don't know the right thing to look for, how do you find it on a website? We have millions, hundreds of thousands of products. So that's the kind of thinking you have to work through to be effective in some of the web design exercises. Um, so yeah, but there are people. So a lot of my work is understanding what human capabilities are, but also human limitations. There's been a lot of research and study in this. One thing we generally recognize about humans don't have great memories, but humans are much better at recognition. So we emphasize recognition over recall. We don't ask you to remember, 20-digit unique identification codes. What we do is we put little symbols on a computer screen. You're like, oh, red octagon, that means stop. Green button, that means go. Little symbols, and that will trigger the memory that will help you know where to go and what to do next. And so we focus that, we bring that kind of focus into design work. That people they don't have great memories about stuff. Now, there are people who take that knowledge of human capability and human limitations, and then they use it in a reverse or an unhealthy way. There's actually a term for it, Mike. We call it dark design, where
Wow.
you cynically exploit human limitations and human foibles. Because a lot of people, they don't take time to sit down and analyze everything and scrutinize it and work out all the implications in a systematic way like a Thomist would, right? They just look for sufficient cues or wayfinding marks or something like that. Oh, that's where I need to go. Oh, that reminds me of this, right? And they need sufficient information, and people will exploit that. And next thing you know, you're clicking on something like spam or some phishing email, and you've surrendered your banking account login information, and it looked perfectly legit because it was branded right. There's just little subtle cues you didn't pick up on because you were trusting them. So there are people who consciously do that, and the hackers, and so yeah, you have to be. We always have to take seriously fallen human nature, right? Um, as Catholics, we know that. In the business world, people don't talk in those terms. You can still make the same point with them, which is, there's bad actors out there. Yep. So you can solve the problem, but if I'm asked, I'll talk about my reasons and how I approach my work, but it seldom comes up that way.
Yeah, because I get the thing about, the bad actors that, they can say, click big button right here, and you're like, wait, what am I clicking? And then you click it, and yeah, then they steal your bank account or something. But I feel like there's another, the other insidious thing that's out there is even the people who aren't trying to take your bank account, but like just something like YouTube Shorts or TikTok, user experience people have obviously designed that to, I think, exploit people's impulses and bad habits, right? So they've put a video right in front of somebody, and if you are interested in it, you keep watching it, and then if you're not interested in it, you swipe to the next one. And depending on how long you view something, it starts to suggest things that are similar to that. And now they might not be taking your bank account, but what I'm seeing there is an ethical problem
Mhm.
because of the vice, the addictive nature of that, that is going to actually train people. And when I say train, I mean through repeated actions. People are going to develop habits of searching for that dopamine hit from just swiping, swiping, swiping. And we all know that if you keep doing that, you're eventually going to be watching bad stuff because you know, that's just kind of how
Wasting
the brain
time.
works, right?
There's a lot of ways it can go bad. Yeah, someone with an addiction is someone with very little sales resistance, right? And they know that, and so they design things to be they call it repeat usage, but it's addictive behavior. And what a couple months ago you had our friend Arturo on, and he talked about the addictive nature of a lot of this stuff. And if you're immersed in it, you have to be constantly on guard against that thing. And but it's designed to draw you in and keep you in. They call it engagement, but it's designed to keep you engaged. They want you coming back to it. So
Yeah, and the cool thing that Arturo always used to tell me about was that behind every website design is some kind of philosophy. That there's a philosophical reasoning, a thought pattern behind why should I design a website this way. And so he's a guy who's saying we should actually try to bring like St. Thomas Aquinas, right? Catholic philosophy back into how we would design a website. And I think you're all over that kind of idea. So, what would be some ways that we could actually start to design um, technology right down to the very hardware, right down to the buttons and the things that I touch, the things that I hold, and then the interaction with the software and the websites and all those things. What are some things that we could start to do, now that the cat's out of the bag and we have to start talking about what should be the rules, how can we use these things in a human way? What would be some things that you would recommend that we start doing?
Yeah, I mean, if you can answer that question, you're gonna do very well and be running a business and having lots of people seeking out your opinion on a lot of important stuff. So no, people, and we're still trying to figure out how to do that, right? And part of it is we're still figuring out what AI's capabilities are. A lot of the people you talk about, they have their own philosophy. One of the philosophies that's taken hold is this transhumanism,
Yes.
which is a sort of evolutionist. It's a very atheistic system. I know a big name, Elon Musk, the guys who run Palantir buy into that as well. And Musk he's a bright guy, but I saw him in an interview once that he was being asked like, what is your perspective on religion? And he said he essentially comes from sort of the Spinoza school of thought. Like, well, Baruch Spinoza was a pantheist, right? So that's where Musk is coming from. And when you have that much influence and control and power that he has, but that's your operational philosophy, there's going to be implications in terms of what you do, how you pursue it, how you implement things. It's not You're not necessarily going to do something in an adversarial way to hurt people, but just because you're operating from false principles, you're going to be doing, uh, producing things that are problematic or cause real harm. So, and that's a risk. Like, Elon wants to go to Mars. Great, Elon, go to Mars. Elon, go to Mars. That's fine. But a lot of the stuff he's doing, he's trying to normalize ways of looking at things, and hey, artificial intelligence becoming the equivalent of human sentience and all that. I don't see it. I don't think that's going to happen that way. But I see other consequences of this that people haven't thought through very well. Part of it is they don't understand human nature very well. So, I mean,
Exactly.
for me,
Yeah.
for me, that's a big part of it, but that's not unique to technology. That's the modern world. That's
Yeah.
people who misunderstand, all kinds of things. I'm reminded. I was talking to a couple of years ago a chap from India, a very bright fellow. He was a medical doctor, and he was Hindu, and he was talking in a a kindly way to me, but he was explaining how in Hinduism in India that they're very open to people from all perspectives and they welcome everybody and they're compatible and conformable with all sorts of things. And I listened to him and I said, and like I said, he was a very bright guy. And I said, but you do recognize that they're mutually exclusive. They can't all be true. And he just sort of did this sort of sideways. He didn't want to address that issue with me. He knew I was right, but he didn't want to go there. Yeah, how do you do it? I mean, you have conversations like this. I publish articles. I am doing that sort of stuff now in the work I do with web design, and I'm trying to, in business we call it being a thought leader. So like I'm being published in, publications, online news sources and stuff in my field, and trying to be an influencer in my not a life coach, but an influencer in my field and with my colleagues. I manage people, I mentor people in my field. So try to get people to see things from that perspective and understand why it's good to do that, essentially through persuasion and by example. When you become good in your field and people recognize that you know what you're talking about, that gives you some credibility that creates opportunities to have those conversations. So that's concretely how I'm doing it. In terms of the technology, yeah, that's a different. I'm not a hardware tech guy myself. I'm more of a kind of an old school. I'm more of a humanist. So I'm like, let's keep it human. So I'm using that to influence my tech guys. And sometimes we're talking at cross purposes or our measures of success or difference. You have to do some translation, but that's how I'm attempting to do it.
Yeah, because I've thought that a really cool business to start, and I don't know if I'm ready to start this one because I'm still working on another one, but um, is a kind of like an ethical technology business, um, where I could, let's say I could find some people who are good with technology, good at making both the hardware and the software and the user experience, and kind of design custom technology for people the way they want it to be. Because the problem I'm seeing now is that I've got all these tools, and either I don't know how to use them, or they're not really usable. They're not very user friendly anymore. It's like I feel like I actively have to fight my technology because it's actively fighting against me, you know. Um, what's a good example? One example is yeah, so on my laptop, I have a picture, a background image, and it just randomly decides to change on its own. And that's not that big of a deal, except that I'm very distracted by photography. So every time, if I crack open my laptop, I'm like, oh, cool, another picture. And then there's like a little icon that says, click here to find out about this image. Like, oh, that's kind of tempting. And that's immediately a distraction, even though, so I'm trying to do something else, but now my computer's distracting me from my purpose. So I actually went in and set all the settings to make it the way I want it, picked the picture that I wanted, and then say, okay, now that's not going to bother me anymore because I just put the picture that I want. I customized all the settings. Then a couple of nights later, my computer decided to update and reset all the settings. So it's like it's fighting me. And my iPhone, I really don't want to have access to the internet on my iPhone. I would rather just have, I'd like to have a GPS on it. I'd like to have maybe email on it, texting, phone calls, and a couple apps. But like, there's a lot of things on there that I don't really want because they end up being a distraction. Um, you know, Pandora. I'd really rather not listen to Pandora because it has ads on it, or not Pandora, Spotify. So I listen to Spotify, and there's like 3 ads for every 2 songs, or 5 ads for every 2 songs. And now somebody could say, well, you could just pay for the Spotify and not have the ads. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to pay all that money. And I actually have like stacks of CDs that I love listening to. But now cars don't have CD players in them anymore. So I guess I could like get an MP3 player, rip all those CDs, put them onto my MP3 player, and then like hopefully have a car that will interact. It's like I've got, they can put a man on the moon, right? All this technology exists, but it's like it's actively preventing me through planned obsolescence and through whoever is designing this user experience. It's like they're forcing me to spend more money on products that I don't want. You see what I mean?
Oh yes, I do. I hear that kind of stuff all the time. Because when they come up with the technology, they're thinking, in a limited focus way. I mean, you can't boil the ocean with whatever your digital solution is. You have to solve a particular problem. But how well that integrates with everything else that's going on in your world and in your life, yeah, they can't anticipate all those situations. I'm reminded of a project I did probably about 20 years ago. I had a client who was in the telecom field, and they wanted to understand how people were using technology in their homes. And so my colleague and I were retained as part of this project. We ran it kind of like a focus group where we recruited people to participate in our study. We said, we want to come into your house. We want to interview you. We want to take pictures and video. And want to see how you're using technology in your homes. And so we did. We recruited these people, and they were compensated just like you would come into a focus group. And we went into people's houses, and I'm like, show me where your computer is, show me where your TV is, show me where your phone is, show me where your charger is, all this stuff. And one of the things we discovered is homes are not built for the tech people have. Every single person had some weird, kludgy, strange, maladaptive way of fitting the tech into their houses. But there were commonalities, like, because the constant is human nature itself. And so people tend to solve problems and come up with comparable solutions. And yeah, it sometimes was very humorous and entertaining how they did stuff. Like, I met one couple, husband and wife, a little bit older. Each of them ran their own business out of their house. The husband had his business. His office was in the garage of the house, and it was still a garage. He had his car, he had his lawnmower there, and he set up his office. The wife worked in real estate. She ran her office out of the master bedroom closet, and it still functioned as a master bedroom closet. So she took my colleague and I up the stairs and into the bedroom, into the closet. We were taking pictures of everything. She had her office in this big walk-in closet. Other people, they would have tech that still works. They would just stick it in their basement. And I'm like, why do you have a box of 8-track cassette tapes from the 70s in your basement? And they're like, well, it still works. Like, so I mean, they didn't know what to do with all the tech they had. They had way more than they needed. And they were coming up with strange creative ways sometimes to fit it into their house. But yeah, I've seen that over and over and over and over again. They create a solution that works for a particular problem, but part of it is one tool by itself. You could have this experience you're talking about, but people have dozens of experiences like that all the time with all the different tools and gadgets and gizmos that they have in their life, in their house, in their cars, in their office, when they're out and about in the city, interacting with stuff. Companies like to use the tools, so they've got you interacting with their website. So yeah, it's very common, and it's not well integrated. It's useful if you want to spend the time figuring it out. Your tech guys love working with the tech, so they don't mind it. But most of us are not tech experts or don't love the tech enough to want to bury ourselves in it and get kind of lose ourselves in it. And we want to like take care of whatever we need to do and then go back about our life. And that's a hard problem to solve for. Not many people do it well.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's what I think, um, as a society, we need to start thinking about making technology like that. Um, and yeah, and why is technology, why are we expecting people to adapt to the technology rather than trying to figure out what people need and make the technology adapt to human nature? I think it's like you said, people don't know human nature anymore. And especially, technical people, tend to be of the engineering type, um, don't know what human nature is. And especially if the philosophy that they subscribe to is transhumanism, well, then they definitely expect people to adapt because their whole idea is like, yeah, I've seen this in like documentaries and stuff where, the journalists ask these scientists like, hey, artificial intelligence, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And they're like, oh no, it just, it just exists. The technology is here. So now humans have to adapt. And I'm like, no, that's not a good way of thinking about it. That's the transhumanist way of thinking about it. You just create technology and then talk about proposed possible uses for the technology. My thesis is we need to go back to, okay, what is human nature? And what does it mean for humans to thrive? And then we need to create technology, whether it's on a computer, whether it's on an iPhone, or whether it is in a car, or whether it is right down to the hammers that we pound nails in. We need to design all of that stuff to help human beings thrive. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with your premise. That's the mindset I take when I'm doing. Let's ground it in what's real. Um, Going back to the topic of our philosophies, transhumanism is one sort of trendy thing that's got a lot of attention, a lot of chatter, and you know, but there are other older problems that really go back to the fall in the garden, which is Adam and Eve were forbidden to eat the apple, and then the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then the devil said, if you do this, you'll be like God, knowing good from evil. And what he meant was, they already had a conceptual knowledge of evil because God told them about it, right? What they didn't have is that experiential knowledge that came from falling. But also embedded in that idea, knowing evil, knowing good and evil in the sense of you will be like a God who defines good and evil itself. Not just that you discover it, recognize it, and figure out how to properly define it. You will dictate what good and evil are. That's actually a divine prerogative. God, by his nature, we know he's good, and we know what evil is as opposed to that. But what happened with the fall was people usurped God's authority, the divine prerogative to dictate what good and evil actually are.
Mhm.
And that thinking is still coming out today, where you'll hear people. I heard it at university, decades ago. Is well, it's a human faculty that we decide what good and evil is. So like, no, we don't.
Mhm.
We discover what it is. Having discovered it, we can then define what we've discovered. But that is not the predominant thinking, and that's not just at the university level. That's common in our culture, and I see it everywhere. And it's an old problem. But that's also part of the problems of the tech. And the example you gave of, well, we'll just put the tech out there and they'll have to use it. Why? Because they've already decided this is good,
Yeah.
whatever their criteria is.
Yeah.
Now they could probably point to some good, like it's lucrative for our business. Like, okay, fine. But in the big picture, is that really a good? Maybe, maybe not. But yeah, and there's all kinds of things that play into that from a cultural standpoint. You know, uh, you can have a company like Google that their whole philosophy was do no evil, right? Well,
Hmm.
how do you can do plenty of harm. And there's two common ways to get around that is one, you redefine what it means to cause harm. You can say, oh, you're just too sensitive. You need to get over yourself. It's like, no, you really hurt me.
Mhm.
The other is to redefine what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And
And they're
and
doing
and
that, aren't
and
they?
we do that. We've seen it throughout history. These people we can enslave. We can put children to death if they're still in the mother's womb. They're not real humans like the rest of us, right? I mean, there's ways to get around that premise that sound plausible if you don't dig too deep, and there's a lot of that. And as people, that goes back to the earlier point we were talking about de-skilling, depriving people of the ability to develop the faculties to reason and to come to the right conclusions given their premise and working out implications. I see a lot of time that you know people they are better at recognition than recall. So you put little symbols in front of them so they know which way to go. But there are people who positively think, let's reduce everything to that simplified form. There's an adage in my field, which is don't make people think, right? With web design. Now, what that means is, complex things you're still going to have to think about. You can't get around that. What that adage is really talking about is the example you give. You don't want the interface of a website to be so bad nobody can figure out what to do next. That's a problem. That's bad design. So you want to design it so that the website, which is a tool, is in a way kind of transparent, but it's designed in a way that is the people who are not experts with the technology can look at it, interact, and figure it out and get what they need out of it. That's the right goal. Well, what people are saying is, words, we think in words. So let's not put a lot of words on a website. Let's simplify it. We don't want people to think. Let's use symbols and icons and glyphs and hieroglyphs everywhere. And there was a real conversation I had a couple of years ago with two of my colleagues. They were both visual designers, more that artistic entry into my field. And they were saying, I think websites would be better if everything was just a symbol of glyphs and symbols and hieroglyphs. And they started to try and rationalize it by pointing out, that really is the oldest form of written language. Letter-based alphabets came along later, and really it's a more simplified form of communication. I said, guys, I don't think you've thought this through. I said, keep in mind, people in ancient times, when they had a choice between their hieroglyphs and letters, they voluntarily chose to go with the letter. There's a reason they moved away from glyphs and symbols. And they said, yeah, but and so we did this back and forth for a bit. And then I started laying out, what we call use cases in the business. I was like, all right, with your hieroglyphs, how do you can get a concept across like sunrise, but how do you get across like complex ideas like future tense and things happening in the future, things happening in the past? Nobody did that with those old symbol-based letters. And finally, I just kind of wore them down, and they just finally said, "Sean, you should have been a writer." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I should have." So, but but I run into that all the time. They want people. A lot of the designs that are coming out now appeal to appetite and not to reason and not to thought. They bypass the intellect. I hear that all the time. My colleagues are talking about this person read this news article. They consume the content. And I'm like, okay, you don't consume ideas. You reflect on them, you ruminate on them, you work out implications. But what you consume is food. But that doesn't involve your intellect. That involves, the animal part of our nature. But that's how they think and talk about complex ideas now is consuming it.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody's, talking about consuming content. And yeah, boy. Um, so I guess what I'm trying to do in talking about all of these things isn't so much to warn people of the transhumanism and the bad actors. I mean, that's part of it. But what I want people to understand is actually how to be human and what human thriving is, so that we can make our own choices about how we interact with the technology. Um, and like, you're talking about all this, moral de-skilling and stuff. And, am I using technology in a way that I'm just consuming content? Am I using technology in a way that's actually making me dumber? Like you said, some people who are designing the technology are like, yeah, let's not design it in a way to make people think. Let's design it in a way for them to just follow their impulses and their appetites. Um, and what I think, if we don't understand what human nature is and the dangers there, then what's going to happen is that when we, as human beings, interact with technology, we become less human if we're
Yes.
not careful. Like you're saying with the moral de-skilling, what does that mean? It means actually developing vices. And you're saying that, here it says in the article, the concern isn't that machines are becoming human, it's actually that modern society forgets what human beings are. It's like we're actually becoming bots in our interactions with these things. So could you talk a little bit about, and maybe we can kind of finish with this. Do you, as somebody with a background in Catholic philosophy and theology, and also a background in user experience, can you talk about the rules that we ourselves ought to use when we interact with these things?
Yeah. A little bit about rules, a little bit about philosophy too, right? Like you think about the purpose of education. As Catholics, we know the purpose of education is to bring out what is best in our nature, right? But you can't do that by pushing a button, right? You need to practice virtue. You need to develop skills in patience, in fortitude. So all these tools that give us instant answers to all our questions, because what happens is people get overly used to it, and then they have some sort of idle, random thought and go, "Ooh, I'd like to know more about that." And they click a button, and now they spend 2 hours reading about, polar bears in the Arctic, and like, you know, does that improve my world? It's interesting, but it's not primary. So yeah, you have to something I learned early in my career, and this is back when I was doing computer-based training and developing online help systems and stuff like that. In the corporate world, you do a lot of. I would train colleagues and people who work for my company and do instruction that way. Training is different from education. Education is more generalized. You're trying to develop the whole person. Training tends to be more focused, tactical, skill-based. Could be a tool, could be a professional skill, but um, generally what I found was in-person training is best. Like I'm the teacher, whether it's one-on-one or a class, I'm with you. Now, from a business standpoint, it's not always cost effective. If I've got a team distributed all over the country and I need my instructor to travel to everybody individually, that's expensive. If I fly them all into one central location, that's expensive. So from a operational perspective, it's more cost effective to do this sort of distributed training, as they call it, where you would do a recording of a training and then people could watch it on their own time. Generally, I don't see the results are as good as in-person training, but from a business perspective, you have to weigh the pros and cons of the two. Maybe not so good, but it is sufficient for what we need. Um, so in general, in-person is better than digital. Um, not always, but not universally, but that's usually true. And for me, that's become a good principle. You can call it a kind of a rule of thumb, but kind of a heuristic, which is, be present in person for people. Use the technology always as a fallback or as a supplement. Don't ever make it primary by choice. Now, sometimes necessity dictates that you do that. If your car breaks down in the middle of the night and you're out on a highway miles from anything, pick your phone up and call. Obviously, yeah. There are good uses for it. But when you have a choice between what's in person, tangible, real, and a supporting tool, make it a priority to always do the in-person thing. Be present for one another. When you're talking, even on a video call like this, put all the distractions aside. Don't be checking your email in the background. Like, develop the discipline to do that. One thing I try to do when I'm talking on camera is just I've been folding my hands, but that's a conscious habit. My hands are on screen, which from a human perspective can be kind of reassuring. But it also I'm not fidgeting with my mouse or playing with a keyboard or doing other things, developing some mechanical habits like that, trying to do things of that sort. But then, yeah, just look for opportunities to do things in person with people, just be present with people, do things, spend actual time with people, go see them in person, do stuff like that. Don't just use the technology as a shortcut all the time. So there's some generalizations that I would appeal to.
Yeah, because I feel like to be humans, we have to get back to human scale.
Hmm.
And, if we are, if we're two human beings and we're like within 5 feet of each other and we have a good half an hour, we can have a good, long, pleasant conversation, um, if there are no distractions, right? But if we are a mile apart, well, then we can't, that's not human scale anymore. So we can't have a conversation, we can't have an interaction unless we use some kind of, device to extend our voices. Um, and at the same time, even if we're only 5 feet apart from each other, but we only have half a second to have a conversation, well, then not very much is going to get said, right? Um, and even if if we're 5 feet apart, we got half an hour, but our attention is constantly being diverted, then we're not really operating as human beings. And so we're not really going to be able to have that conversation. So, um, human scale, what does that mean? If I make a staircase and all the steps are 1 inch high, well, that's not human scale. If I make all the steps to be 15 feet tall, well, that's not human scale either. You can't walk on a staircase where all the steps are 15 feet tall. And what I'm seeing with technology today is that we we have so far surpassed human scale that it's like very few of us have ever really even experienced human scale. Like, I mean, obviously not, we all have a little bit, but it's like those of us who remember being kids and playing outside in the backyard and playing with grass is actually becoming fewer and fewer people.
Yeah.
We can drive, we drive cars so fast, we never actually just like go for a walk and talk to somebody. We can communicate on our devices now so fast. We can communicate faster than we can think. Because thinking takes more than half a second. We have to process these things. It's like somehow we have to learn how to discipline our use of technology so that we can get back to human scale, to put these distractions away sometimes, get them out when it's time to use them, and then put them back away. And use them in such a way so that when we're finished, we can go back to being a human being and not a bot.
Yep. Use them in a human way, cognizant of the fact that there are people out there designing them to always be up in your space and in your business. And that's a conscious thing that's being promoted. So you have to, I think, deliberately and consciously find those boundaries and set them and reinforce them yourself. And there's not a lot of institutional support for that. Um, and so that's why, as traditional Catholics, I mean, we know what's at stake. Um, and always on an individual basis, we can do what's virtuous. You'd like it if your public institutions helped reinforce virtue and helped you in an institutional way to do the right thing. Our institutions are degraded by and large, and not Catholic and not really very human either. And so we are at a disadvantage. But on an individual basis, we still have that responsibility to do the right and moral thing. And the other thing, I'm reminded Pius X, his motto was to restore all things in Christ. And when he would give sermons or talk about that, he says, we don't have to discover what that means. We already know what it means. We've already had a Christian civilization, a Catholic civilization. What we need to do is is rediscover it. It's the same thing on a human level with all these questions of personal virtue and developing qualities of patience and temperance and fortitude and being merciful and gracious towards others is we already have examples of what those things are. We have to now dust them off and consciously bring them back up and bring them to the fore. We don't have to discover what they are. We know what they are. We just have to remove all the distractions and all the debris that's in the way that keeps us from readily seeing them all the time and carving out time to do that.
So what is something, Sean, that I can do to help institutionalize this in some way, or to set up some kind of a program or a plan to help people get back to using technology in a human way?
uh, you could spend a lot of time, I think, unpacking that. So yeah, I mean, in general terms, yeah, setting boundaries about when you use and don't use the tech, um, having conversations like this and making people think about it, giving people language where they can talk about it and give them the right words to know how to articulate the ideas. Like someone might feel just a general sense of unease about stuff, but they don't know, they can't put their finger on what it is that's troubling them or why it doesn't feel right. So just having those conversations and making people aware about it. The stuff you're doing as a life coach, I think gives you opportunities to do that. So I would say, but yeah, stay abreast of what's going on. Be mindful that the the main ideas behind this pushing all these tools are not primarily Catholic. So as Catholics, we can use things in a prudent way, but we have to have proper safeguards in place for how to do that. I know that's very generalized, but it's also a function of applying a lot of the principles that we live by routinely as Catholics. I know friends of mine who have kids. Like I don't have children, and it's not that I don't care about how to raise children with the tech around, but since I have no primary knowledge around that particular question, I generally defer to other people who can speak to that with more authority. But I mean, kids are especially vulnerable, and I would say if you have children in your life, you had kids of your own, or you're a teacher or something, you have to be especially careful to protect the innocents and the vulnerable people with disability. Similarly, I have more experience with that. I have relatives who are with physical disabilities that I've helped look after. So, you become aware of what their needs are, what their limitations are, how to be helpful to them. But yeah, protecting innocence. You can have conceptual knowledge of evil. What you don't want is that experiential knowledge because that'll sadden you and break your heart and leave you compromised when you still need to make a good fight.
Okay, well, Sean, thanks very much. And can I end by reading a quote from your article?
Sure.
The deeper issue is moral formation. Humans become what they repeatedly do. A culture of constant stimulation, instant answers, emotional dependency, and passive consumption will eventually shape persons who struggle with contemplation, prudence, and self-command. And you know what? I would actually take that a step further. And instead of saying eventually, I would say rapidly. I would say that happens pretty quickly with people. So, well, Sean, thanks very much and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Ed. I enjoyed it. Take care.